They say grief is a fog. For me, it was a lens. While my son stood at the pulpit honoring his father's mistress, I wasn't crying. I was calculating. They saw a grieving widow in black lace. I saw a crime scene in 12-point font. Charles forgot one thing in 42 years of marriage. I was a senior auditor long before I was his wife. The casket is closed, but the books are finally open.
My name is Ruby Reed. For 42 years, I was the invisible architect of the Reed family legacy, standing steady in the rolling hills of Buckhead, Atlanta. My husband, Charles, was a man of immense, almost regal stature, a titan of real estate who moved through the world with a kingly authority. When he passed away in a sudden violent tangle of metal on a rainy stretch of I-85, I believed I was mourning a partner who had cherished me until his final breath. The service was held at a historic chapel in the heart of the city. I sat in the front pew, draped in black lace, my dignity unyielding despite the hollow rhythmic ache in my chest. I had walked away from my own career as a senior auditor back in the 80s because Charles had been so insistent. "Ruby, you've worked hard enough," he had said. "Let me provide for you. You keep the home and I'll build the empire." I believed him then. I thought he was offering me a queen's rest. I had no way of knowing it was a strategic removal from his world. Our son Andre stood at the pulpit. He is 33 now, a high-level consultant in Silver Spring, Maryland. I expected a eulogy for the family we had sacrificed to build. Instead, he dropped a bomb that shattered my reality in front of our entire community. "There is one person I need to acknowledge," Andre said, his voice thickening with a strange, heavy emotion. "A woman who truly supported my father's spirit through his most difficult seasons. Someone who was more than just staff. She was family. Sienna Brooks." The congregation let out a collective gasp. Sienna, Charles's executive partner for over a decade, stood up from the second row. She was dressed in a sleek designer suit, dabbing her eyes with a silk cloth in a performance of grief that mirrored my own. My own son had just honored his father's mistress at his funeral. As the service ended, I caught a whisper meant only for her. "You're the only one who really saw him for who he was," Andre told her. The following Monday, we met at a glass skyscraper overlooking Midtown Atlanta. The attorney, an older man with a voice like shifting gravel, refused to meet my eye. According to the will signed by Mr. Charles Reed 3 years ago, he stated with cold mechanical precision, the bulk of the estate, including the family home in Buckhead, the summer cottage in Martha's Vineyard, and the primary investment portfolios, is to be inherited by Miss Sienna Brooks. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at Andre, who sat there with his chin high, looking like a cruel mirror image of his father. "Andre," I whispered, 42 years. I stayed home, I raised you, I built his social standing. What did I mean to him?" Andre looked at me with a cold, detached pity that was sharper than any insult. "Dad needed someone who moved at his pace, Ma." Sienna understood the business. She didn't constantly challenge him or bring up the old days like you did. You were just too traditional, too stubborn. In that moment, I realized the depth of the betrayal. Charles hadn't just cheated. He had spent years poisoning my son's mind against me, painting me as a burden to be tolerated while Sienna was framed as the inspiration. I returned to our home, but it felt like a museum where I was the only exhibit nobody wanted to see. I spent the night in the study, searching through Charles's private safe. My hands remained steady. That old auditor's instinct was finally waking up. I found a hidden ledger buried beneath a stack of old property deeds. It contained maintenance records and tax filings for the Martha's Vineyard house dating back 18 years. Every single check was written to Sienna Brooks. I walked next door to see Miss Hattie, our neighbor for 30 years. When I mentioned Sienna, Hattie's eyes softened with a painful, long-held truth. "Ruby, honey. I thought you knew," she whispered. "Charles would bring her here during the summers you were in Savannah caring for your mother. One year they even hosted a neighborhood barbecue while you were away. He told everyone she was his distant cousin helping with the estate. And Andre, he was always there with them. 18 years. My husband hadn't just been unfaithful. He had built a parallel life. He had integrated my son into it, teaching him that this new family was the one that truly mattered. But I wasn't just a discarded wife anymore. I was Ruby Reed, the woman who used to be able to find a missing penny in $1 million budget. I called my old friend from the firm, Bernice Washington, a forensic accountant who never missed a detail. "Bernice, I need you to dig," I told her. "I think Charles was using company equity to fund this woman's life." We met at a small soul food diner in College Park. Bernice opened her laptop, her face illuminated by the clinical glow of spreadsheets. "Ruby, look at this. He set up a shell company called Peach State Consultants LLC. Over the last 7 years, he moved over $450,000 into that account. It was labeled as marketing research, but every dime was funneled into Sienna's personal bank accounts and her mortgage payments. Charles had been stealing from his own company to buy a life for his mistress. He hadn't just been a liar. He had been a thief. And Sienna was the one holding the bag. I hired Angela Stone, the sharpest litigator in Atlanta. We filed a suit for corporate fraud and tortious interference. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was a pressure cooker. Andre sat behind Sienna, his hand on her shoulder, looking at me as if I were a bitter old woman trying to steal what wasn't mine. Sienna played the victim perfectly, wearing a modest dress and speaking softly about her devotion to Charles's vision. Her lawyer argued that Charles was a private citizen who could do what he wanted with his money. Then Angela Stone stood up. "Your Honor," Angela said, her voice booming with authority, "this isn't about a man's heart. This is about his ledger." We presented the Peach State Consultants documents. We showed that the marketing research Sienna supposedly did occurred while she was actually on a private yacht in the Caribbean with Charles. We produced the 18 years of records I had found, proving a systematic plot to plunder the marital estate. But the final blow was something they didn't see coming. I had found a signed post-nup agreement Charles and I had drafted 20 years ago during a brief rough patch. It stated that if any undisclosed assets or fraudulent transfers were discovered, the entire estate would revert to the legal spouse. Charles had forgotten about it. He thought he had successfully erased me from his narrative. The judge, Justice Baker, looked at Sienna with a gaze that took no nonsense. "Ms. Brooks, can you explain why the company paid for your luxury SUV and your consulting fees while you were documented at a resort in Bermuda?" Sienna's composure crumbled. She looked at Andre, but he was staring at the table, the weight of the evidence finally sinking in. Justice Baker's ruling was swift and severe. She declared the shell company transfers fraudulent and ordered Sienna to return every single asset, the house, the vineyard cottage, and over $1.5 million in stolen funds. Sienna was stripped of everything. She lost her job, her standing, and the fortune she thought she had stolen from my life. Andre didn't speak to me for 2 years. He stayed in Maryland, hidden away in his shame. Then last May I was sitting on the porch of my new home, a quiet, beautiful house in Savannah. I was watching the Spanish moss sway in the breeze when a car pulled up. It was Andre. He looked older, humbled. "Ma," he said, standing at the bottom of the stairs. He told me he had finally gone through his father's old business emails. He saw the way Charles had laughed about keeping Ruby in the dark, and how Charles had manipulated him into believing I was the enemy. "I let him make me hate you," Andre whispered, his voice finally breaking. "I was so blinded by his success that I couldn't see your strength. I didn't scold him. I just opened my arms. You were a child he was training, Andre. But the truth is finally out." That evening, after Andre and I had shared a meal, I sat in my garden. I looked at a magnolia tree I had planted when I arrived. It had struggled at first, but now its leaves were broad and green, its blossoms thick and white. I realized that for 40 years, I had lived in Charles's shadow, thinking I was protected. But the shadow was just darkness. Now I am finally standing in the light. I am Ruby Reed. I am a mother, a survivor, and for the first time in my life, I am the only one holding the pen to my story.